All right, is this on? I can't actually tell. I'm just going to go with it. Everybody's going to hear me. It's going to be fine. This is a murmuration. This is to help calm me down, not for you. This is not a talk about performance anxiety. It's a talk about design anxiety, which we're going to get to. There's a little bit of introduction first. But I am very anxious. It's normal. If none of you have done this, you should do it probably at some point if you're okay with that. Anyway, hello everyone. It's great to be here today with the whale and the dinosaurs. As Henry said, I'm Carl Collins. I work in digital product at a bank. That's me on the weekends. And just because I have to say this, what I'm going to talk about is not about my job. I'm not appearing in a professional capacity. My views are my own and not the views of my employer. Any false or misleading statements are entirely on purpose. I'm going to talk about something called Quickpoint. Now, you've never heard of this. It doesn't exist. Kind of. There's this idea of passion projects, right? People love to talk about their passions. Now, I don't like this word because we forget that the etymology of passion is suffering, and I refuse to suffer. No, I like principled projects. I like this idea of, okay, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to set out to do? This idea comes from many sources. One of them is a gentleman named Brett Victor. If you've never heard of him, he runs a site called Worry Dream. He's also part of this amazing, inventive computer collective called Dynamic Land, built on the idea of computing research. And it's really this idea that our systems, like we've reached sort of a technological dead end, right? Like technology has evolved to a point where we have streaming video. TikTok is the latest thing that captures our attention. But what if computing was doing more? What if computing was really about responding to what we're creating and using all the things that digital technology can do that it's not currently doing? In this project, I work with a man named Greg Kavanaugh. He's an engineer, musician, music producer. He lives in Youghal, which is a small coastal town in Ireland. I live in North London. And one of the things we share is this obsession with the neurologist Ian McGilchrist. McGilchrist writes very, very big, very, very dense books I don't really understand the science of, but I love his metaphors. And they're all about this sort of idea that left brain thinking has really taken over social discourse. There's a lot of people writing about this, like about how the era of the Enlightenment historically in Europe created these ideas that have come to dominate culture since then. And he really looks at this both from a neurological point of view, like, hey, if you have a stroke or you have these different brain disorders and your brain functions differently, you behave differently. There are these real physical things going on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is not that lecture. We're talking about Quickpoint, right? So Quickpoint is presentation software that Greg and I are developing. And it's presentation software, right? Like it's this idea of communication. It's what I'm doing right now. And it comes, so I was a professor for many years in New York. I taught at both Parsons, the New School, and Pratt University. And there was always this thing where I put a lot of time into making presentations and getting up and delivering to the students. And then there's the deck and all the conversations and the different Blackboard or whatever learning education garbage was forced upon me and them. And there was this thing where, okay, so I'm doing a presentation right now, and then when I'm done, I want to give you a link that you can take with you, and if you wanted to read what I had to say again, you could. Not that you're going to want to, but it's the idea. And also just, again, principles, right? Like, I want it to be easier to make beautiful presentations. I hate using Keynote and Google Slides and PowerPoint, and all these tools and I hate using Figma too, because I have to drag stuff around. The only thing I love in Figma is auto layout. I can never make it work right, but when it does, it's absolutely brilliant. And I want to make it easier for people to make beautiful presentations, right? And I want to do this using text. Like, I want writing to be the primary modality of what you're doing. And I want to, have something that has a friendly attitude, that understands these things are difficult, these are strange ideas. Right, what is it? So what does it mean to have software that does everything with text? Well, we sort of know what that is. Like, if anybody's ever tried to code, code is all done with text. Now, coding sucks. Coding sucks because you have to remember everything. I'm going to repeat this a couple times because it's like the big problem. But that's not a fault of coding in itself. It's a coding of the IDEs, the interactive development environments that exist today, right? So what if there was an IDE for writing presentations? What if it knew this was difficult and had a guide, a contextual guide as its default state, right? It's going to be like, here, in the state of your cursor, these are the sort of commands that are available to you. This is what you can do with the software. And of course, you have your text editor where you can press buttons to have text appear. You can write text, and you also have a constantly running preview that is showing what's going on. And, like again, this is just sort of like showing a different state in the sense that the cursor's in one place. I've now highlighted text. Now different options are available to me to how to modify that text using the system. Wow, that's weird. And it is weird, right? A friend of mine who has used the prototype is like, wow, this is like a different evolutionary branch of what these types of software can be, right? And it does have like a historical thing, right? Like, I'm not trying to be overly nostalgic. I'm also going to say that many times in the presentation because I do reference old computing a lot because I'm fascinated by things that don't exist anymore. Like, I wouldn't want to use HyperCard again because there's so many things we've evolved beyond it. But it is great the way you can build a functioning application in HyperCard just using buttons. Like, you press a button, it's like, what do you want this button to do? You could play games and build calculators. And anyway, Quickpoint is for writing presentations. And again, it's that idea of something being written, right? But it's also this idea that each presentation is an internet object, right? Each presentation is multiple things. You have one text file that is both the presentation you're giving and the document you can send to somebody by changing the URL that has all the extra text in it. And again, it's this idea of, okay, what if we stop trying to do everything? What if we had a piece of software of limited capability and really emphasize that? And there's another thing called token exchange, which is a patent technology that Greg's developed that lets you pay people using URLs. And so you could integrate that into the whole thing. That's on a whole other talk. Anyway, sort of, Greg's and I guide for like what Quickpoint does is actually this old book. It's like this great idea. If like we can do everything that PowerPoint did in 2000, we're going to be fine. Of course, on the road to success, there are no shortcuts. And that's why I'm here to talk to you today about design anxieties, because of course, we're doing all this work. It's great. It's exhausting. I have a full-time job at a bank. And if I were to try to catalog all the anxieties I have in this, we'd really be here a long time, and we'd end up like this. So I'm not talking about these anxieties. These are our other real anxieties. These are my anxieties you face. They're not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about these three, which is abundance, audience, and aspect ratio. And we're little pause. Right? So the first thing, anxiety of abundance. Right? So here is a drawing of a frog that has anxiety and is trying to design a website. I feel like this a lot. Right? And so again, there's this idea of I'm doing my own thing. I'm working on a piece of software. Oh my gosh, what does that mean? And it, like a huge piece of what I want that doesn't exist, at least in the form that I know it, is a contextual guide, right? And there's also like, oh gosh, this is going to have to be a business, isn't it? We'll talk about why does it have to be a business? Why can't it just be a project? And then of course accessibility, which is easy to say, harder to do. And it's sort of, it's this idea, right? So often the things we use have no manual anymore or a very bad manual. I mean, case in point, it's getting colder. It's like, oh, how do I set my thermostat? Like, my partner looked at the manual and was like, I don't know how to do this. And like, I looked at the manual, and it's not that I'm any smarter, it's just that I'm used to how bad these things are structured that I can deconstruct it. I was recently back home in California visiting my mother. And I'm sure this happens to a lot of you. Just you become the home IT specialist just because you happen to work. It's like, you work in tech. You can figure this out. We usually have we catch up a lot on FaceTime. It's been harder recently because our internet's failing. So of course the first task is go buy a new router, get that set up. That's fun. And another thing, she a few years back, she was suffering from limited mobility. So we set up her whole home with little like voice-activated lights and these fancy, internet home switches. And of course, changing the router meant those didn't work anymore because there's a new network in place. So you're like, okay, there'll be a manual for this. Let's go look at it. I mean, there's an app, right? There's an app for the light switches because it's 2022 and that's how things work. But you go to the app and like there's no instructions in the app. There's no like, hey, I have a new Wi-Fi network. What do I do? So you go to the internet. You go to this page, which also looks like they're trying to sell me more stuff, which is great. Like, I understand why we do these things. I don't understand why it's like a marketing department somewhere said like, hey, can we put ads on the manual? And someone said, sure. without like, and again, this isn't like a criticism. Like we do seem desperate, but we are. And then okay, the manual for this thing. This is great. The manual literally says this is like don't change your network name. The best way to keep everything working is to never change your network name or password. And again, it's like this sense of edge cases. Like the app doesn't let you change it. The device itself is like you set it up once and you never change it, which is great. Like there's never this thought of anything ever changing. And so you literally have to factory reset everything in the house and set it up again with a new network. Like that's it. That's what you're stuck with, which is again fine. I mean, there's stuff that's been done that's very great. There's stuff that's done that's very bad. But it's like how can we do better? How can we integrate this stuff? Again, with my mother, we also got our smart TV, which is great because you turn on to the new network and immediately starts downloading all these apps. She doesn't have accounts for any of them. She only uses Netflix. And so I go and I'm like, okay, I'll try and clean this up. I'll get rid of all the apps that aren't Netflix. And you can't do it. Like the software is there. There's a remove app button that's inactive, and you can't do it. Now, again, I work in the industry. I understand these things. Like I'm sure that Amazon paid Samsung some cash so their app can never be deleted. Fine, business happens, but it's like this real sense, right? Like I have this thing, and because of business, because of bad software design, and not bad, just particular. You can't do anything with it, and it's like, okay, I want to do, like if I'm doing something myself, I want to do something different than that, right? Like we're so different by metrics, and we've talked about this some today, and like different things we want to look at, and you would, and I know this in my own life, in my career, like you never make a customizable interface, like no one's ever going to use it, but why? But it's also like we have like the technology is there. It's not even that much work anymore to do it. Like maybe it's some work to support it. Maybe people will break it. And how do you make a guide that helps people modify their own interface be part of the interface, right? That's the questions I want to sort of approach. And it's also this sort of anxiety that comes to mind. It's like, wow, that's a very anti-business decision to make as someone who might be starting a business. Like I'm going to invest more in crazy stuff that doesn't exist because I like it. And again, like, why does it have to be a business? Well, it's true. As soon as you have anything that has user accounts, you're suddenly responsible for any data they put up there. You have to, there's internet. I mean, again, it's the internet. You put a link out there, anybody can go to it. Different governments have different laws. You got to know those laws. I know them. They're fine. Right? And again, like if you suddenly take on this all these levels of responsibility, right? You're like, oh gosh. If people are posting presentations online and sending links, I got to think about moderation, safety, weird stuff people are going to do that I don't think of because I'm weird enough. And then there's, notions of anonymity, notions of profit all collide, right? And like moderation's hard. I mean, the frog was altered. And moderations are also expressions of values. Like it's a very real thing. Like as soon as you're like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to moderate this, it's like, well, how am I going to do that? Oh God, gosh. Anyway, and there's the other pieces of business stuff, which is like, okay, how do I make obviously there's lots of ways to make money. But there's also this point that I remember. So the photos of the photo that I just clicked over, Bill Cunningham was a New York street photographer. Like he lived very cheaply. He just lived in had a cheap apartment, studio, lived alone, wore mostly old clothes, rode his bike around, took photographs, sold them to the New York Times. That was his life. And because he didn't ever take anybody's money. Like nobody invested in him. He didn't have shareholders he was responsible for. And it's like, okay, so how do you take these different ideas and meld them together? And they all sort of, build into this giant tumble of anxiety that I don't have any resolution for. And again, abundance. Accessibility. We like to talk about accessibility, and again, oh my goodness, I hate that I'm talking about this. Like, I hate that I'm saying that accessibility is actually difficult to do. And I mean that from the sense of somebody very busy who's trying to like put together an app, and like I'm looking at different things, and like there's so few examples of good apps that have large type and good color contrast. Like everything I look at is like, oh my gosh, stop using 36 shades of grays. I've become the developer complaining about the shades of gray, but not from the developer's point of view, but just from the fact that like these things are hard to read. We can do better. And like Quickpoint, just how we're building it, like we build it as a single page web app. Great, tons of efficiencies we gain building it that way. It's really hard to make those work with a screen reader because you then have to go back and figure out how to re-render the HTML so that an application that somebody with limited ability can then function with. And of course, alt text, right? Again, principles, like I want every image to have alt text as like a requirement. Like if you're using our software, you're gonna have to put in alt text. It's like, why? That sucks, that's so much work. For who? We're only a third through. Oh my God. And audiences, right? So like this leads into audiences, right? It leads into like, okay, what are you responsible for? Who's this Quickpoint thing actually for? Which it's so if I can figure this out, then I can relax like this frog. Although he's still on a laptop. Right, my good friend Abby, information architect, sense maker. If you don't know her, you should look her up. Anyway, it's again, like you're making software. Like you need to count for so many things people are going to do. Like they're not in the glass. There's that amazing thing that happens when you like have a glass and there's like the smallest amount of water, and then you knock it over and the water's everywhere. Right, and so this is like again, there's this phenomena of the internet that makes it great. But once you have a link, like anyone, anywhere, at any time can access that link. You don't know what they're going to be doing. You don't know what's going to be happening. Of course, nothing at all might happen. No one might ever use this. Again, myself, I've been a professor. I can code, so like there's like using a text editor to write functions is normal to me. I'm not fluent in it, but it's comfortable. And it's this thing. Like I love this part of programming. I love uploading a file to a server and it worked. Like you just refresh the URL and then it works finally after many, many hours of effort. And it's like, how can you help people have that experience? Again, this is like, it's not necessarily like it's not like I want people to learn how to code, because again, I don't think most coding languages are structured well. So it's again, arrogant. Can I structure a better coding language? I don't know. Again, looking at Quickpoint, just to put the interface back up on the screen, refresh everyone's memory. My partner calls this project the Pompidou of software. Right, all the inside bits are on the outside, and it's really this thing. Like who wants this? Like no one's asking for this. People are asking for better presentation technology and better ways to share presentations. That's a real thing. Doing tons of research on how people use PowerPoint. It's a lot of people's only visual expression tool. And they love it. They don't want this. And again, these ideas, like I don't know if there's this great book on design, Shaping Things by Bruce Sterling. It's one of the books that really helped me get started in the field. And again, he talks about these ideas that we talk about a lot, but were new ideas back when he was talking about them, which is like, everything, like there's an opportunity cost and cognitive load introduced by applications. Like if you're asking people to do different work, it's like, oh, the opportunity cost, do I do something else? The cognitive load, why am I thinking about this? Right, and like there's this thing that I love about design where I like thinking about all this stuff. Most people don't. Most people prefer not to think about any of this at any time, ever. And so it's this, that's where the anxiety comes. I'm like, okay, and everybody says this. Everyone's like, well, who's the audience for this thing you're building? I'm like, me and the guy in Ireland that I convinced to work on it with me. Simon, when I showed him the prototype, he's like, what's the human need? I'm like, communication. We all need to communicate, don't we? Which is, and we're working it out. We're gonna, and if anybody has any ideas, please share them with me. I'm very open. So, here's a picture of an old keyboard. Again, nostalgia. I'm not trying to like bathe in nostalgia, but there's this huge error we made in accepting the screen keyboard instead of the physical keyboard. I believe that very strongly. And if we go back, one of the best things ever written in digital design is Apple's Human Interface Guides from 1987. You can find a PDF online if you haven't ever seen it. It's amazing because it's really this underpinning of an idea of, okay, why don't people like using computers? Oh, because, well, or why are they using it in the first place? Like really basic stuff, but still super, super useful. And this idea, like, no one wants to remember how to do something. Like if you, which is what you, like, when you sit down to program, you have to remember all the commands. Like, which is like, oh, that's why it sucks. And so it's like, as I'm trying to put together something, it's like, really, it's this anxiety. Like, will people tolerate this? And if so, who are they? Are they just me? And it's really, I know what's out there isn't great, but it's this sense of like, just hating PowerPoint isn't enough. Maybe it is. I mean, I've done a lot of things in spite. But it's arriving at this idea that, I really want something that's, like, again, I don't want it to be simple. Making a presentation in any environment, either to give a talk or as part of a lecture, is complex. There are things that come up. You have to think about it. You have to think about a lot of different aspects of it. There's visual design stuff as well that might come into play. And of course, we have new tools available, maybe. There's a brief moment about can't even say that word. It's certainly artificial. It's not intelligent. We'll be hearing more about this. I'm not trying to steal anything from him. But people are like, oh, like, why can't you, there's a lot of these systems are prompt-based. You type in some text, the computer guesses what you wanted, and you get some weird stuff. One of my friends who's a designer, who's used Quickpoint is like, hey, this kind of sucks. Why don't you just turn everything into prompts? Like, imagine, I'm like, I don't want to define all these rules. I want to define a set of components and tools that exist in the software, but I don't want to write down all of the rules. Like, I don't want that to be my job. I want to have a toolkit that people can use. Like, it's this different aesthetic. And there is this thing where, and this is a weird idea, right? The problem with these prompts is sort of outlined in this tweet that I'm going to talk about, which is there's no way to get good at them. Like, there's like prompt marketplaces, which is super weird. It's like, hey, we figured out how to be slightly good at getting this computer to do random shit, and you can pay us to learn that because you don't want to spend your time doing that. But there's still no control. There's no way to get exactly what you want. You just get something, and that's because of how these systems we call AI work, right? Again, there is no AI. It's just a great marketing term that we've all gone with. Yay, us, right? Like the really good pattern matching systems, they never say no. They don't say, hey, I don't know what the hell you're asking for. They just go, what about this, right? And they parrot text, which is great, but that means they're just repeating us back to us, which means they're just as racist and sexist and cruel and confused as we are. And it assembles images. That's a crab. And it's all this stuff together, and it's very important. Especially, this is just. I don't have any prescriptions in this talk. I don't have any conclusions, but I do suggest learning a little bit about how this stuff works. Reading the research, like Emily Bender, Timothy Gabru, whose name I'm butchering, and I apologize to anybody that does know her name or knows her. I'm very sorry. I should have looked that up more ahead of time. But again, there are people writing about how these systems work and explaining them clearly. And it's like there's no magic there. They are computer systems. We've built them. They process large amounts of data. They pattern match against mostly English text, and that's what they do. And that's why I don't want to use them, right? But I'm building this thing. It's something that's happening, right? And it's this anxiety of like, okay, what's right for the right amount of people? Like, I don't want to actually make something for everybody because that seems even more exhausting. And I'm not trying to. I don't mean to like criticize you for that. Again, like it's like growth is good. It's not. I mean, maybe. Anyway, I have a lot of anxiety. This is the last one, and this is the most design one. And this is really where the subtitle from the talk comes from, right? Aspect ratios. Like, I literally don't know what screen you're going to open a link on at any point in time. There's so many screen sizes. There's so many devices that can open up a URL. Again, here's a better crab. Like this, I feel like this a lot, just like struggling to make the design application do what I want, right? I love design. I love print design. This is an old Japanese poster for the Jacques Tati's film Playtime. And I love things like this. I'm like, cool, how do I turn, this is how I spend my time. I'm very boring. How do I turn this into like a digital object? Like, how do I can see all these things as elements on the page. I'm like, okay, how could I design a system that could rearrange them? And like this, I love classic magazine covers. The Esquire covers of George Lois are really phenomenal things if you've never seen them. Again, nostalgia. I'm not trying to just be like, old things are good. They are. But at the same time, it's really interesting to look at this, to take it apart and be like, this works because it's so specifically designed to be a magazine cover. And it was novel effects at the time. Like photo-compositing was a professional thing that you could do this 1,000 different ways, much easier than he could, and figure it out. He had to go through this whole process to make the cover. And I'm like, okay, again, taking things apart. I'm like, what the widescreen version of this cover? I'm like, well, this is dumb. I would do something else. And it's this idea, like the anxiety is like and it could just be, this could be the anxiety of my own imagination. Like just this sense of like, I don't know how to imagine taking things apart in the way I want to, and to have them work across these devices. This is a film still from Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love. It's beautiful. There's so many wonderful things about this composition, right? You have two characters who are facing each other, but you can't see them facing each other. You see them both facing away from each other because of how the shot's structured. It's just, there's so much poetry in this, and then this is what you would see on a mobile phone. Or maybe this. Or maybe this, right? And you're like, oh, damn it. Right, and it's this thing. It's like oh, how do I decide on this? And then so much of my work with Greg has me been drawing like just pieces arranged differently. Like how can the software account for this? He's like, no. And I'm like, what about this? And he's like, no. And I'm like, what if somebody opens it on a Nintendo dual screen? He's like, shut up. Because these are the things that I get obsessed with, right? Like I have a friend who is a birder and a photographer, and he makes these great little bird cartoons and Instagram stories. It's very fun to follow because you get to see bird cartoons. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, how does this work in an environment where I want to have a system where you could make something that looks like this on a phone and look something like this, something different in presentation. And again, my notebooks are filled with maybe, there we go. This sort of obsessive, just real anxiety about how do you architect this system, especially when there's not that many great examples of really not like design that actually responds to different environments well. So essentially, Quickpoint just does. Oh my goodness, I've lost control. If I ever had it. So again, Quickpoint does one thing. You can either have 9 by 16 or 6 by 9. Now it will respond between it. We'll see what that means, hopefully. Again, giving up control. There is so much about this, about giving up control. There's Greg's like, I've worked with designers for years. He's like, you always want the perfect magazine layout, and it's not possible. You got to give up on that idea, and you got to actually focus on what these tools do. And there's really cool stuff you can do when you switch that focus. The future's dangerous, be careful. And there's so much to be anxious about. And anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Abundance, audiences, aspect ratios. I think I have. And there's this idea from John Chris Jones, Welsh designer, amazing if you've never seen his stuff, sort of architect. There's a phenomenal book called Designing that I love. And he has this idea, right? It's this idea that, I've made a classic mistake. I've rolled everything into the design problem, right? And as you do that, you're like, oh my gosh, my whole life's a design problem. And then it gets really unstable, right? It's just bigger and bigger, and then you're like, oh, here I am talking about it, right? And again, this uncertainty can create anxiety. And so again, not advice, just an idea. Remember what you're responsible for. And it really, really that. I mean, one of the things about this is I'm not. The default state is this doesn't work at all. Nobody likes it. Whatever. So anything beyond that is amazing, is incredible. And this idea, right? Just take the moment. What am I responsible for? What are the limits of my responsibility? What do I want to be responsible for? Why am I here and not being a frog on a bike somewhere else? All right, that's it.